Hello, welcome to World Talks on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski made himself very clear at the UN Security Council meeting on Monday, telling Russia not to, quote, whine if its planes get shot down over NATO airspace. Tensions are rising across Europe's eastern flank as reports of repeated Russian violations of NATO airspace trigger alarm in capsules from Tallinn to Warsaw. As military pressure escalates and diplomatic channels tighten, the stakes are high. Joining us to assess the situation and its broader implications is Aleksander Cwalina from the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, good evening.
So as a reminder for our viewers, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets entered the Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland without permission on Friday. And I want to begin our conversation with an excerpt from the remarks delivered by Margus Tsahkna, the Estonian Foreign Minister, at the UN Security Council meeting today.
All of them, they carried missiles and they were combat-ready planes. And you can see from here as well, Russian representatives, that these are the photos which really were taken during this heavy violation of NATO and Estonian airspace. So what I want to say, that violation is crystal clear. And Russia is lying again, as it has been lied before several times. We remember the occupation of Georgia, 2008, 2014, Crimea, 2022, aggression against Ukraine started. So please don't lie again. Hard evidence is here.
So give us your comments on those remarks, please.
I think, just to begin, I think it's notable to mention that this marks the first time in over 30 years of Estonia's membership in the UN that it has requested an emergency meeting of the Security Council. I think this really signifies the seriousness from Tallinn in bringing attention to and hopefully garnering a response to security threats conducted by Russia, as well as show the seriousness in this possible threat from Russian invasion of both NATO but also international airspace.
Now, before we carry on, I want to bring in the Polish perspective with remarks delivered by the Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski at the same meeting today. Let's take a listen.
We have given Russia a pass in the past in such circumstances. But we have not heard any apologies, only lies. Together with the intensification of attacks on Ukraine, they seem to be an eloquent comment on, quote, moving from confrontation to dialogue, end quote, promised by Vladimir Putin in Alaska. These breaches of airspace are suspect because they are an escalation of hybrid war which Russia has waged against the West for years. Murders of politicians, journalists, human rights defenders and defectors, cyber attacks against hospitals and financial institutions, arsons, including in Poland, UK and Lithuania, postal packages containing incendiary devices all over Europe, including Germany, attacks on Ukrainian embassies, in addition to standard espionage and disinformation.
So Radosław Sikorski takes a slightly broader look at the situation in terms of Russian violation. What is your take on both these remarks?
I think both Sikorski and the UN representation from Tallinn and the UN make a very important point that this is nothing new coming from Russia. This is a deliberate strategy to probe the defenses of Eastern Europe and of NATO through these sort of small ambiguous operations, whether they be arson or sabotage or these drone and flight incursions. Though initially they do not seem to be serious or posing an imminent danger to the alliance and to lives and citizens on the ground, this is all part of the Kremlin's ultimate goal, is to proceed incrementally and probe the defenses and to see how NATO would react. But also it comes with a material gain for Moscow as it seeks to probe the defenses, see where there are vulnerabilities, see how fast NATO takes to react, scramble jets, etc. But most importantly, this is also part of the Kremlin's way of checking the security and guarantees under NATO's Article 5. Article 4, for example, is the precursor to sort of hold this dialogue over the seriousness of these breaches or incursions. However, there are concerns from European capitals on how much an Article 5 guarantee could hold up in either Washington or in other fellow European capitals. And that is what Moscow is trying to do through these little incursions, through these step-by-step incursions, to mount these operations to test whether or not the alliance is ready to respond.
Absolutely. So what are the actual legal and political implications of Estonia bringing this violation to the UN Security Council?
The legal implications include primarily formally documenting these Russian violations and bringing it to the floor to be discussed and addressed by Russia, and also reaffirming Estonian and NATO sovereignty over its own territory. And as I mentioned before, it also demonstrates Estonia's willingness to and seriousness of this issue, given that this is not only the first time in its entire history in the UN that Estonia has invoked an emergency meeting of the Security Council, but also the first time it requested NATO Article 4 talks over the same issue. And Article 4 is also, I believe it is important to note that in addition to the invocation by Poland over the drones that violated Polish airspace, NATO Article 4 has only been invoked 7 times in the alliance's 76-year history. So this represents a real seriousness that I believe is mounting in European capitals, not only in Tallinn and Warsaw, over this probing of NATO weaknesses and NATO opening points by Russia.
Sure. So we've got some paperwork filed, essentially, but what does this UN Security Council meeting actually do? Like, does it actually make a difference? Has the Polish consultation changed anything? Will it make a difference for Estonia?
I think it is still too early to tell. What matters most is a collective resolve from the European capitals and also in Washington over how they will proceed with deterring further Russian aggression, whether it to be continued monitoring of the situation and just the paperwork, as you mentioned prior, or, for example, whether it takes for example, these countries taking these issues into their own hands, which includes, but is not limited to, increased surveillance, but also the possible shooting down of drones or even fighter jets that invade military airspace in these respective countries.
You say it's too early to tell, but we're looking at 3 countries who have had their airspace invaded in a very short period of time. So how long can we wait, to be honest? Like, you know, we're looking at a Security Council meeting that took place today. There will be a continuation of that tomorrow. But if we're having airspace violated, 3 countries, in such a short period of time, we can't really wait and see, if you see what I mean.
No, I absolutely agree. And it is worth noting that the UN meetings are going to continue through this week, and whether or not there will be a serious action taken during these meetings, or, for example, if Russia continues to provoke NATO airspace and continue these sorts of small-scale incursions, we will have to see how these respective countries will respond. It is also important to note that individual NATO members make sovereign decisions about defending their airspace, and this means that national commanders have usually pre-authorized rules of engagement for immediate threats. However, more significant escalatory decisions, for example, shooting down a jet, could involve consultation of NATO command and national leadership, which would take longer, but would assuage some of these concerns about escalation.
Well, we have the Polish government, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, coming forward and saying that any object entering Polish airspace will be shot down. In your opinion, does that rhetoric actually deter or risk escalation from here onwards?
I think in large, this helps deter escalation in the sense that Russia cannot go forward with having these incursions and invading NATO airspace and whether it be in Poland or in Tallinn or, for example, Romania as well, without a response in kind. And I think this sort of Russia is a country, and Moscow, primarily under Putin's reign, is a country that understands strength and understands force. And if they are allowed to continue with these sabotage campaigns, with these incursions into airspace, into cyber warfare and disinformation without any sort of pushback, then it is only going to continue. And I believe this recent statement by Prime Minister Donald Tusk shows that Poland is ready to respond in a way that I believe credibly would deter these further engagements by Russia. However, currently these are words, and it is important to see if they will be backed up with action in future incursions such as these or future incidents.
Well, Prime Minister Donald Tusk has come forward and made a very firm statement. Do you think that NATO would follow suit?
It is difficult to tell at this moment on whether or not the entirety of NATO. It is a large alliance comprised of many states with their own goals and their own even relationships for the region. However, I believe what Poland can do right now is exactly what Tusk is proposing, is Prime Minister Tusk is proposing, is to hold this sort of strong rebuke and promise of action if Russia continues to make these incursions and provoke the Polish border and airspace.
Okay. Aleksander Cwalina of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. And that wraps up World Talks. Thank you so much for joining us here on TVP World. I was your host, Marie Caso. Stay tuned for more on our channel and our social media platforms. Goodbye.